A huge diplomatic and online row over Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade, who was arrested and strip searched over allegations of paying less than minimum wage to her domestic help in the United States. India has responded with very strong reciprocal steps against what they say is a violation of the Vienna Convention in how Devyani has been treated. US, however, says that Vienna Convention only applies to acts of consular functions. But issues of immunity apart, and amid the chauvinism, are we ignoring a very pertinent question? Is there a violation by Devyani of the US law? When was the last time you heard of an arrest in India pertaining to failure of paying minimum wage? Is Indian state itself guilty of violating its own labour laws? That's what we discussed on the Social Network today. Who pays minimum wage? Neither state nor the citizens. Let's quickly introduce our panelists for the day today. We're joined from New York by Mihira Sood, who is a lawyer. She joins us from New York. In the studio, we're joined by Ananya Bhattacharjee, who is a union leader, and we're also joined by Rakhi Sehgal, who is a labor activist. Okay, Mira, I just want to quickly ask you, start with you first. You know, there are two issues arising over here. One, of course, is that issue of the immunity and the whole whether or not the Vienna Convention has been violated. What in your sense, what in your understanding is an understanding of that particular immunity issue?
See, I think there's a misconception and it needs to be cleared up. There are two different conventions that deal with diplomatic immunity. One is the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Immunity, which applies to diplomatic agents employed in the embassy, such as the ambassador. They enjoy the highest degree of privileges and immunities, including personal immunity, immunity from criminal prosecution. They cannot be handcuffed, they cannot be arrested, their property cannot be entered or searched. Right now, Ms. Khobragade was not in the category of a diplomatic agent. She was performing consular functions at the consulate, and the U.S. State Department is very clear on the immunity to be given to consular agents. And it says that they have only those acts which are in their official capacity are immune from prosecution, such as what they call functional immunity. And their personal inviolability is also quite limited. And they can be arrested or detained pending trial if the offence is a felony. Now, what has happened in this case was that while there are of non-payment of minimum wage and similar economic abuse of domestic help in the past, it was treated as a civil matter. Here, they decided to treat it as a criminal matter on the issue of falsification of documents. So there the US had a choice in whether they want to treat it as a civil matter or a criminal matter. And in this case, they've decided to treat it as a criminal matter. All right, Mihira, we're having some problems with your audio line, but I'm going to throw that across to Ananya. Ananya, there are clearly two issues. There are two people involved in this particular story. There's the diplomat and there is the domestic help. We all seem to be only talking about the diplomat. What about the domestic help?
Well, that's the whole point. The whole story and the media and also the government's reaction has been all about the employer, who is part of the Indian consulate. But the other person, who is also an Indian citizen, seems to have been forgotten in this process. The other person is a poor woman from India who was illegally taken by the employer to work as a domestic worker and was mercilessly exploited. I have known about this case. And I used to also, many years back, live in New York and was organizing domestic workers there. Also, many women like her, and I have seen a lot of cases where people working in the UN and all these intergovernmental institutions and international institutions would commit this crime over and over again, and under the guise of diplomatic immunity, much would get not noticed. And this is a big shame, because what is really happening here is that the Indian government seems to be demonstrating a lot of misplaced patriotism. They are being patriotic only when it comes to the employer, the fancy deputy secretary general, but has no words to say about the poor woman who served them for years and who was really exploited and mistreated.
Yeah. All right, Rakhi, if I could just bring you in, you know, this, of course, we're looking at the US government, in fact, acting on a particular law that has clearly been violated in their own country. What about the labor laws in India? Do we even have a national minimum wage? What is it?
We don't actually have a national minimum wage. It's something that we've been asking for. Different states have different. There's a central minimum wage, and every state gets to fix its own minimum wage. And according to different sectors, it has different minimum wages, and then again according to different skill sets. So unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled workers, super skilled workers would have different rates. But the point here is also that it's hypocrisy at another level also, because the Indian government is the biggest violator of Indian labor laws here in India itself, number one. Number two, the Indian government is asking for the salary rates paid by US diplomats to their gardeners and drivers in domestic helps here in India. This would be a great beginning if the Indian government was serious about bringing all these vulnerable categories of workers under the labor laws of this country and ensuring protection to them. The Indian government has turned the most vulnerable women workers of this country into volunteers in the form of ASHA workers under the NRHM, the National Rural Health Mission, as Anganwadi and midday meal workers who are not brought under the ambit of labor laws. In Bombay, the municipal corporation has turned its Safai Karamcharis into volunteers of NGOs because they wanted to organize themselves into unions to demand minimum wages and other statutory benefits under labor laws. So the Indian government has also, with the 6th Pay Commission, got rid of the class 4 employees, which employed the largest number of Dalit workers, and those jobs have become contractualized, and where workers are employed in perennial jobs day after day, year after year, whereas the Contract Labour Act specifically says you cannot employ workers, contract workers in perennial jobs. So they've turned, so you know, there are other ways of violating minimum wages by forcing workers to do forced overtime, where you don't have a choice to say no, I don't want to work overtime, and then either not paying them or paying them single rate and not double rate, not paying their provident fund. These are all forms of violating the minimum that the workers are meant to be paid.
Let us also not forget that domestic workers are not covered under labor laws in India.
I was just going
to ask, for all the row that the Indian government makes, actually the Indian government has kept domestic workers out of all the labor laws. This has been a big fight, and there's a national platform of domestic workers organizations that are currently trying to get a domestic workers bill into the parliament, and it has been many years and they have not respected that. So the Indian government is actually failing at many fronts. It's failing its own workers here, and it's failing its citizens who are not elite diplomats elsewhere.
And
so that means it only really cares about elite Indians here and abroad.
That's actually very shameful. But Ananya, just really quickly, what about citizens? What about all of us? Do we respect the domestic workers?
That's a very good point. I think that in India, because of the divisions of caste and class, we really don't respect many types of workers. We don't respect domestic workers. We don't respect people who clean. Basically, we don't respect, we refuse to get toilets that are proper, for which we do not need manual scavengers. But in spite of the Manual Scavengers Act, we today have many manual scavengers. So there is a shameful denial on our part of very important labor.
It's all of us, isn't it? Rakhi, and I just quickly want to actually end with that last point. You know, I mean, it's really interesting because many of us were actually having a discussion about this outside the studio and outside the newsroom, and we were talking about how many of us are now paying very heavy salaries to our domestic helps. And the heavy salary is what? Compared to what it used to be 10 years ago, which was like absolutely paltry and nothing. So that's a,
and we're not even taking, we're not taking into account the fact that that domestic help, even if you're paying her a heavy salary, him or her, you're not taking into account inflation. They still can't make ends meet and have to work in multiple homes, and they have to do back-breaking work. Even if they're full-time help, you're making them work 10-12 hours, whereas the minimum wage actually is meant for 8 hours of work. So we're exploiting them there, not giving them any kind of paid leave, not to talk about the kind of physical and mental torture that we are seeing coming out in the newspapers every day here in Delhi and across India as well.
Yeah. And let me add just one one more point is that when people take domestic workers to the United States, they usually live in domestic workers and they're working 24/7.
Yeah. All right, Ananya and Rakhi, actually really important points for all of us to think about, not just the government's response to that particular story, but all of our own reflection of how we actually treat domestic. I just want to take you guys through a couple of tweets that have come in. Kavita Rao has said that lots of us do down south. She's of course responding to that question, how many of us pay minimum wage? But I think that would be a very, very minuscule number. Somebody else has tweeted in saying India should behave and take notes. Response is not on par with the arrest, shows lack of development. And Chinu has written in saying never. That again is in response to who pays minimum wage. And Subhash has tweeted in saying exploiting poor is unpardonable and no one should be spared for this offence of not paying minimum wages. So of course, lots and lots of stuff that Rakhi and Ananya have given us to think about. But with that, we slip into a short break on the social network. Come back, lots more on the other side.